welcome to Eco Show. I'm Henry, and in this show we talk about happenings in research and news in ecology and environmentally related things. I'm trying a new setup with the camera. Usually I have it on the front camera, and so I can monitor it, but I wanted a little bit nicer quality, so I've turned it around, but now I can't see if anything is happening, so hopefully this all works out. It looks like the microphone is plugged in, and it looks like things are happening. So we've got a lot of stuff going on this week to talk about. We'll go through our animal of the week, and then some research and some news. And we have quite a bit of news this week. I have a little bug dancing around. Wants to be part of the ecology. Okay. So the animal of this week, hello, welcome. The animal of this week is the echidna, which is very much like a hedgehog. It has little spines. It's a quill-covered monotreme, and a monotreme just means an egg-laying mammal. And there are only two monotremes really left, the platypus and the echidna. We'll cover the platypus another time. Hold your horses. It's even more interesting in some ways than the echidna. So there's 4 species of echidna. The short-beaked, which is really common across most of Australia. The western long-beaked, which is endangered. The eastern long-beaked, which is critically endangered. And Sir David's long-beaked, which is critically endangered. So 3 of those 4 are very endangered. And the Sir David's one is named after Sir David Attenborough, I believe. And those 3 other ones aren't actually in Australia. They are, I'll put it on a map somewhere. So this is hard. When I can usually see myself, I can point to where I'm going to put an image, but I don't really know where to point. So there's going to be an image somewhere. But so there's 3 other species are usually in Papua New Guinea, and they have lost a lot of habitat to different human-related issues. Some background on the echidna is that they evolved between 20 and 50 million years ago, and they were named after Echidna from Greek myths, who is half woman, half snake. Or it was named so it was named after that half woman, half snake person because it has the qualities of mammals and reptiles. Or it was named that because there's confusion with a Greek word, echidnas, which means hedgehog, sea urchin. So the name comes from something, and that's what's important. So it's either a spiky thing or a half woman, half snake thing that the name comes from. Either really works. It's spiky, and it's also like a half woman, half snake, but not really that much like a half woman, half snake. They are solitary mammals doing their own thing, and their spines are actually modified hairs and are made of keratin, which is the stuff that your fingernails and all of that is made of. They have electrosensors in their little nose. I'll have put up a photo. Actually, here's the echidna photo. Hopefully I put up a photo of all the different species. So in their snout, they have electrosensors, which they will use to sense burrowing prey. And they have long limbs and strong limbs. They don't have long limbs at all. They have strong, little chunky limbs that they can use to dig for goodies for their little ants and things that they're eating. They have a long tongue, which they use to collect prey, and surprisingly, they are good swimmers and enjoy using the water to bathe. Who doesn't? They are thought to live 14 to 16 years old, and they mate and lay a leathery egg. When I was reading up about echidnas, there was a very graphic section about their mating. So if you're interested in echidna reproduction related information, there's a lot of information there. They have interesting parts, is what I will say, but I thought not to go into it here. But yeah, they have a leathery egg, which is pretty cool, and a young echidna is called a puggle, which is a pretty fantastic name for what this is. And the name sort of makes sense. We'll put an image of a puggle right here. But marsupials, well, this isn't a marsupial, is it? It's a mammal. But from what I was reading, the egg hatches, but what hatches out is pretty similar to, is in sort of a fetus-like state. So then it sort of crawls over to the parent and takes a while to develop. So I think the name puggle definitely sounds like what this thing looks like. Apparently it's hard for them to, or they haven't been able to get them to reproduce in zoos. So getting especially those endangered ones to breed has been challenging. But the more common one from Australia is doing pretty well across the country, even though it still is under threat from habitat destruction and things along those lines. And they are important for ecosystems because they are estimated to move up to 204 meters cubed of soil a year. So a meter is like 1 arm's length. So you think of a cube of that and then multiply it by 200. That's a lot of soil being moved around. So that's like, whoa, that is a lot actually. If a football field is, oh no, it wouldn't be a football field. So actually maybe they could do more. I'm sure echidnas, you gotta step it up. 204 meters cubed. I think you could do more than that. Okay. That's all we have on that for today. I don't know how long this episode is going to be because now I can't see how long I've been recording for, but I think it's not going to be a long one. We have a little bit of research, and then the main thing today is talking about some interesting news that happened this week in the ecology space. So it's a little bit more of a news heavy episode than a research heavy episode. I picked out a bunch of articles, but none of them, when I was looking over them, none of them were really seemed particularly interesting except for 2. And the first one that we'll be looking at is looking at spiritual ecosystem services from giant trees. So this researcher wanted to get an understanding of the spiritual ecosystem services that can be obtained from giant trees and what might cause those to happen. So trees are some of the biggest and oldest organisms that we have on Earth. They've often had important roles in rituals for different cultures and they're often even given unique names. They can inspire a sense of awe. They may become objects of faith, and they have a spiritual connection with people. They can encourage social cohesion as well. So this sort of spiritual ecosystem service that they're talking about that trees can give is that it provides this sense of awe, it provides social cohesion, sort of cultural benefits that are outside of what we can necessarily explain, and so they're spiritual. The researcher was looking at this by, so let's see, I have another line in here. Attachment and identification. Yeah, so what they looked at was they looked at over 30,000 trees in Japan with a circumference greater than 300 centimeters. So that is, circumference is the way around, and so I think that would be, so let's do a little, I think it's easier to think about how wide it is across. I should have done that calculation, but I think the circumference is, it's either, oh dang, what is it? Okay, 1 second. I'm looking up the circumference equation. Circumference. You're having to deal with this. Circumference is 2 pi r. Okay, so circumference is pi times the diameter. So 300 centimeters, divide that by pi. Let's say that's 100 centimeters diameter, and 100 centimeters diameter should be a meter across. My brain is totally mush. Let's say 100. This is becoming the me Googling things show. Yeah, okay, 100 centimeters is 1 meter, which makes sense since centi is 100. Okay, so 1 meter across, so that's about 3 feet across. So they were looking at all of the trees, or they were studying over 30,000 trees in Japan with a diameter bigger than a meter, and they were looking at the probabilities of that tree being associated with faith and spirituality. And so they had this major database of trees, and they looked to see which ones were given names, and then related that to the size of the tree, which is impacted by climate characteristics. So there's sort of a bit of a tenuous relationship in my mind between that. I'm not doubting the spiritual importance of the trees, but relating it simply to what they did find was that there was a relationship between sort of the bigger the tree is, the more likely it is to have a name and so be associated with spirituality. And then they connected the likelihood of those trees that were given a name to different environmental characteristics like precipitation and temperature. And they were thinking about the areas with lower temperature and higher precipitation would give bigger trees, but precipitation didn't necessarily lead to those bigger trees. But they did find that bigger trees were more likely. an object of faith. I think the tricky thing with doing this was treating these trees as individuals instead of as trees that are, or plants that are connected to each other, because we know that there's lots of relationships via fungi between trees. And so you may have a lot of big trees that have relationships like these, but if you're just looking at them as if individuals, things might be missed. But I thought the idea of looking at the relationships between spirituality of a tree and its importance to people and these other characteristics was something cool to do. I'd be excited to see more about that at some point. And that article was Macroecological Processes Drive Spiritual Ecosystem Services Obtained from Giant Trees by Ryosuke Nakadai. And our next research article is more of a headline one, but it's related to olive trees and how they will be affected by climate change. Surprise, it's not going to be good, according to these researchers. And that is because, although the olive tree is adapted for a Mediterranean climate, that area is getting hotter and drier, and there is a loss of productivity and fruit and oil quality that is associated with these hotter and drier temperatures. So to look at this, they looked at 5,400 years of olive tree dynamics to see how productivity and quality of the fruit has varied over those 5,400 years. And so I wasn't thinking about it until this moment, because I was thinking you can look at the rings of the tree and historical trees to see how much they've grown or not from year to year, and then base those off of climate. I'm hearing a loud beeping. I hope it's not beeping in the thing here. But yeah, we've got a garbage truck, which is important. I think collecting garbage is an important thing to do. And landfills are wild. Just thinking about, I was out at a ecological restoration site the other day that was built on top of a landfill, and the sort of fill that was going into this landfill was, there was cinder blocks and there's all these building materials, which are sort of the things that you don't usually think about as much. Geez, apologies if that was a loud cough. I tried to cough off of the mic. I'm not getting allergies from the mic today. Okay, but anyways, on the landfill thing, you see your own garbage going out each week, but you don't think about all of the building materials from different structures being broken down, and that those are just put into landfills is pretty wild. That's one thing that I don't have a good grasp of, how that's able to be done sustainably. So those are my thoughts on landfills, but back to the olive oil production. They were, and I didn't read enough to see how they looked at those 5,400 years of olive tree dynamics and related that to fruiting quality, but I imagine fruiting quality can be extrapolated from how much or how little an olive tree is growing per year, and so they were able to look at those historical things. And they found that optimal fruiting scales are around an annual average of 16.9 degrees Celsius. And so some regions may become too hot for optimal flowering and fruiting of olive trees. But that average, I did sort of rush the reading of the research articles this week. I just couldn't get up the motivation. So there's big gaps in my knowledge of this research paper, which is a disservice to society. But I will give you the name so you can read it if you want to look it up. But my thought is, so they were talking about this optimal average of 16.9 degrees Celsius, and with climate change, temperatures are going to go up. And so the quality of the fruit of the olive is going to go down, they're saying, which I'm not denying that, but I wonder if looking at just the annual temperature changes is really going to give a good estimate of how these trees are going to respond to climate change, because we know some of the big impacts of climate change are not only the average temperatures that will be increasing, but also the seasonal changes. So earlier seasons coming, later seasons coming, erratic weather, which can lead to changes in when there's snow and things like that. So I expect that there are other things that are going to be impacting olive oil production. And it would be interesting to see where is predicted to be more suited to olive oil production than where is promoted now. Because maybe that'll be, maybe places where produce olive oil now, maybe they'll be like tequila capitals growing agave. I'm pretty sure you get tequila from agave. Or aloe vera. Maybe these things are going to change around. It doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but I love olive oil, and I would hate to see that production change. Okay, so only 2 research articles this week. I'd like to see how long I've been doing this for now. And I hope, and this will also test to see if I'm still recording. So I'm getting around behind the thing. Oh, and I have the thing over the thing. Okay, 20 minutes. It's still recording. And I've only been going for 23 minutes. I've got all the time in the world. Okay, well, we'll see how long these... great. Okay, so I've seen now how long I've been recording. And now I'm looking at my laptop, which is telling me what to say. And I have a clock on it. So I'm able to now look at that clock and keep track of how far along I am. So it's 3:08 p.m. right now. I've done 23 minutes. So let's say that's 3:10. So 3:20. Okay, so I should aim to wrap this up by 3:30 if I want my phone to be able to process this without me having to delete everything else on the phone. Okay. I think we have plenty of time for that. So I have some good news and I have some bad news, folks. Well, actually the bad news is more interesting, so I'm going to save it till last. So, sorry about that. But I'll put the good news first. In the UK, Coal demand fell by 15% in 2022, and it went so low that it broke a 266-year record. Not since 1757 has the country used so little coal, about 6.2 million metric tons. According to a new analysis from the website Carbon Brief, the last time UK coal use was this low, Mozart was still in nappies, which is diapers. That was tweeted by Simon Evans, Carbon Brief's deputy editor and policy editor. So carbon demand decreasing doesn't necessarily mean that, or the coal demand decreasing doesn't necessarily mean the energy demand is decreasing, but we know that coal has particularly bad health impacts on people in the form of particulates, and this is being talked about a little bit more with people even just burning wood for fires, and that the particulate outputs from burning wood fires can be pretty bad for your health, and also in areas that are low-lying. When that smoke is burned, it can pool in areas. So, but I do love a good fire. Just sad to think about not having fires, but also one time I was going on a run, and usually when I smell the smell of a wood fire, I feel sort of a nostalgic or a excited feeling for it being wintertime and bundling up. But this one time I was going for a run in fairly chilly weather, and I was running by a house, and it had the fire going and the smoke was coming out, and it was just a nasty feeling when you're running. When I was running by and you could smell it, and you're just like, oof. Because when you're running, even when it's cold out, you feel pretty good, and you feel like this cold doesn't really matter anymore. So the appeal of being warm isn't really there anymore, and you just smell the smoke, and you can kind of feel it sitting on you, and it feels sticky and sort of nasty. So I do like fires, but this is nice to hear that coal demand is decreasing in the UK. Okay. See, now I'm thinking about the length of this podcast, and now I'm thinking about the time and really wanting it to be like 40 minutes, but I don't want it to be just filled up, and I only have one more thing to talk about. So that was the good news, and now we're getting into the bad news, which is sort of the highlight article or the low light article of this week, which is and I didn't read. Okay, back to the olive oil. Sorry, quickly back to the olive oil article that was titled "Climate Change Threatens Olive Oil Production in the Levant." That was by David Kaniewski et al. And I think the Levant, I'll put up a photo of the Levant here. I haven't been indicating to myself to put up images, so this is going to be a little bit trickier to edit. Okay, so Wikipedia says that the Levant is an approximate historical geographical term referring to a large area in the eastern Mediterranean region of Western Asia. And in its narrowest sense, which is in use today in archaeology and other cultural equivalents, is equivalent to, so I think it's sort of I'll put an image up here. I think I already said that, but sort of around the area where Israel is. Oh, so I was talking about Italy and that sort of thing growing olive oil, but it looks like it is a little bit lower latitude-wise than possibly Spain and Italy. So yeah, maybe Israel and those regions will be growing agave and aloe. All right, so we've tidied that up. I'm just gonna look over now if any of the other, I did choose out other research articles, but yeah, none of them really have good titles. I believe the articles this week were from Nature Plants, which really wasn't hitting it this week with inspiring articles. Anywho, on to the last news item, which is the not good news. And that not good news is about the Willow pipeline, which is being put down in Alaska. And this apparently has been getting a bit of coverage on social media. It's definitely been in the news in the past week. And leading up to this past week, it has been in social media quite a bit. Apparently it's been on TikTok a lot. People have been talking about it. Activists have been talking about this project. So the oil company is ConocoPhillips, which has leases on oil extraction in the Arctic. And I wrote down 7 billion, but I don't I'm not sure what the 7 billion is related to. Okay. I think that was the expected amount that they would get from selling it or something like that, which obviously 7 billion is a lot of money, but for when we hear about how big this project was, I would expect it almost to be a little bit bigger than that. So this project that was just approved on Monday will be exporting 180 barrels of oil per day, and that is on conservative estimates is the equivalent of adding 2 million cars to the road per year, but other estimates put it as a higher emissions amount that's more like adding 70 coal power plants per year. And because we're talking about carbon being accumulative in the atmosphere, so when you burn carbon dioxide, that's being put up into the atmosphere, and our rates of taking that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere are out of balance now. So carbon dioxide is building up in the atmosphere, and that has sort of like a blanket effect on the planet where it makes things a lot warmer. And some opponents to climate change, people have lots of different things that people, I guess, will debate, and they'll say that those climate changes, that it isn't caused by carbon dioxide and that it's normal, which is on long time scales, the amounts of carbon dioxide do change, but over the short time period, the rate of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is directly related to human causes. But interestingly, it's been sort of out of, people are still talking about climate change, but other topics have been a little bit more in the public domain of debate. There's been a lot of things about sexuality and gender that are sort of wedge issues that people are using to politicize, but those issues are being used in the same way that climate change was used sort of in the 2000s, where people made it into a political thing rather than a scientific thing. So this is a big pipeline and a big issue for the Biden administration, because they famously said that they weren't going to do any more drilling or things like that. And so people are like, hey, guys, you're not doing what you said you'd do. And they're sort of saying this excuse of that it was approved by the Trump administration and things like that, or that they would be sued by ConocoPhillips because ConocoPhillips, the oil company, had the leases to this land. And so they're sort of making up these different excuses, but at the end of the day, it seems like they probably could have stopped it, but they had considerations economically from this oil company, and there's some rationale that by producing more oil locally, it will make the U.S. more independent on foreign sources of oil. And also there are people in Alaska that are promoting the pipeline. A lot of people in Alaska are promoting it because of the tax benefits to Alaska, and Alaska relies in many ways on the taxes and things like that on oil, which leads to the bigger question that, okay, if the economic growth of that state is based around oil extraction, then that is something that obviously should probably be changed, because it's not going to go on forever. It's not really sustainable. So it would be great to see some of the same gusto put into these climate change issues as were put into the pandemic. But I think the cynical view of it is that there's still quite a bit of money to be made in oil, and so there's a lot of power behind those groups advocating for that and lobbying to get these projects done. And this will have a large climate impact. I'm not sure if it will have if that amount of oil would be used already, but I believe the lease on this land is for 30-something years, so this is sort of locking in the U.S. to extracting, or this company from extracting it for quite a long time. It's almost like, okay, I'm gonna lose weight, but I need to I'm gonna make myself eat 5 bags of chips a day. So then you're just sort of you're like, yeah, I'm trying to lose weight, but then you're also just like continuing to make it not easier for yourself. And so when you've got 30 years of oil extraction continuing to go on, that's not necessarily gonna promote a positive changeover. Some things that they've said, that the Biden administration has said in response to approving these leases, are that they are then going to put 3 million acres of sea off limits for drilling. I'm not clear on if that can last anytime beyond the current administration. It seems like it's probably an executive order, so I imagine it could be reversed pretty quickly. And they've also said, they said that they discussed with ConocoPhillips to decrease the number of drilling sites from 3 to 5. But if you've seen the movie There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis, you'll remember the famous line, "I drink your milkshake," or something. He says something along those lines. And so they'll still be able to extract the vast majority of the amount of oil that they are looking to extract, despite only having 3 extraction sites. It'll mean that there's a little bit less infrastructure having to be built, which will have less of an impact on the species. So the main species that will be impacted by development in these areas are caribou, which the species name is Rangifer durandus. And I don't know much about caribou, but it's an important species for the environment and for subsistence for people living up there. And I think I wrote down the local folks who live around the area in a town called Nuiqsut, which could be pronounced very incorrectly, but it's Nuiqsut. And the mayor is against the development there. And just last March, there was a methane gas release from another ConocoPhillips drill site, and it forced the evacuation of 500 people from this town. So, although there is apparently support from indigenous groups in Alaska, people who are immediately close to where this development are going to be are raising concerns about it because of health issues. And unfortunately, so it's not looking good in that situation. Is there anything else? Okay, so the interesting thing with this is that apparently the building needs to start during the winter period because of something to do with the going through the permafrost, which is sort of like it's land and soil, but it's frozen. And so I think it's more effective to drill and set up your extraction equipment during the winter. So apparently you can't set up the equipment during summer. So they are needing to do this by about April because that's when winter up there would be wrapping up. But there are a few different legal injunctions that people are trying to get in there, which could delay this project by a year. It sounds like the senators and things that are supporting this project, as well as ConocoPhillips, are pretty confident that they have the legal standing to withstand any challenges, but that delay could hold things off a little bit. And so it makes you think about where else could these resources be used and be put into. And I think it would be one thing if it was a company or if it was associated with the government to some degree. We are reliant on oil for lots of reasons. So if I'm giving the benefit of the doubt, I could see how wanting to, have a national extraction thing would be appealing, so that you're not having to rely on countries overseas, especially if you have no choice but to continue to use oil and things like that. But the whole tone of the administration, of the Biden administration, is pretty disheartening when it comes to this, particularly Deb Haaland, who is the head of the Bureau of Land, management. She, in the past, has been against the willow pipeline in particular. And it was on her desk ultimately that she had to her department had to sign this. So she's the Secretary of the Interior. And so she had been against this project in the past, it seemed like, and she was taking in different people who were sort of protesting or against the development of this. But then on the day they signed the contract, she released a video that was kind of a little bit brutal to watch because, she's sort of doing the little spin thing, and I think people are pretty over. I think people would have more understanding if her response was sort of like, yeah, this sucks, but I didn't really have a lot of choice, or if she resigned, but she sort of like toes the line, which I think is pretty disheartening for people to see. And I'm sure it wasn't easy for her to have to do it either. And I think on the final approval document, it sounded like her signature was not on it, but sort of somebody else from the Department of the Interior was there. So it's heartbreaking to see these drilling projects going, because you just know it's nasty all around. I mean, the good thing is hopefully there is money that goes back to local communities in Alaska. But you just think, man, you just wish you'd see more creative thinking and more sort of different ideas for how to get the funding needed in Alaska, and doing things that are a little bit more in line with a regenerative future and things like that. Because you see that, and you see people wanting to initiate things like this to improve the economic situation in Alaska, but the increased cost that you're incurring from climate change sort of outweigh that. Geez, I got a frog in my throat. Anyway, so I think that's about all we got for this week. So a little bit of a bigger news article, a little bit less on the research, but I really did not have the motivation to do much about research this week. So hopefully there's no big bad news in the coming week on environmental things, but we shall see how the legal challenge plays out on this pipeline and go from there. So thank you for checking in this week, and we will catch you next time. See ya.